The State of the Union live team coverage tomorrow starting at 9 on CBS.
Tonight, with Nikki Haley leaving the presidential race, where will her supporters go? Then, could this new screening system help you beat security lines at the airport? The future of travel on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
The time has now come to suspend my campaign. Politics is about bringing people into your cause, not turning them away.
We have a great Republican Party with tremendous talent, and we want to have unity.
What people are responding to, including progressives, is they want someone who will deliver.
I'm a mom to 4 young adults, and I have a lot of questions that I need Joe Biden to answer tomorrow in his State of the Union address.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. The House of Representatives has passed a funding package that would avoid a partial government shutdown set to take effect on Friday. The legislation now heads to the U.S. Senate. Negotiators are still working to reach an agreement on another set of bills that would avoid a full shutdown. Now let's turn first, though, to the race for the Republican presidential nomination. Breaking news this morning, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley has suspended her campaign for president after a big defeat on Super Tuesday. This sets up a likely rematch between former President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden. Both are closing in on the required delegate count to secure their party's respective nomination. Haley, however, did not endorse Trump today during her remarks.
It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that. At its best, politics is about bringing people into your cause, not turning them away. And our conservative cause badly needs more people. This is now his time for choosing.
His time for choosing. CBS News campaign reporters Olivia Rinaldi and Nydia Cavazos joined us now. Olivia has been following the Trump campaign very closely. Nydia has been doing the same for Nikki Haley's campaign. Nydia, let's begin with you. Haley's the headline today. Where does she go from here?
You know, that's the question that we're all asking, what happens next to Nikki Haley? And as far as today, we can say she's definitely out of the race now. And with this decision, this means we're officially kicking off the general election season. But as far as Nikki Haley, she's been saying that she doesn't want to completely step out of the picture. She's going to continue to be a voice for what she truly defines as the essence of the Republican Party. She's going to continue to express her opinions and vouch for that. Now, of course, we know that during her formal announcement today, she was suspending her presidential bid. She left with congratulating former President Donald Trump, but stopped short of endorsing him. And we know from talking to some of Haley's allies and her campaign that it is possible that, she's still thinking about this endorsement. And we don't know to this date if we're going to be hearing from a potential endorsement in the upcoming days or upcoming weeks. Of course, there's no necessary timeline for her.
Olivia, there's a lot of tough talk among many Trump allies about Nikki Haley might as well just come around eventually and endorse Trump. And there's not really seemingly a push to secure her endorsement anytime soon. But is there a concern inside the Trump orbit that eventually they're going to have to make a concerted effort to reach out, if not just to her, but to her voters?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bob. I mean, we heard Trump back in January talking about Nikki Haley voters and saying we don't want them in our movement. We don't want them in our party. But striking a different tone last night at Mar-a-Lago, even though he didn't mention Haley by name, he said he's interested in unifying the Republican Party. He means all Republicans going forward, making sure the entire party is really in lockstep and working towards re-electing Trump in November for a second term. But really, there's this broader effort to coalesce the party around him. But it is notable that this morning in his statement, he trashed Haley, said that she was horrible on Super Tuesday and that she got trounced, and then said, but I'll take some of her supporters if she'll have them. So it's really this balance that they're weighing right now. But there should be some concern. There were several states where Haley had edged ahead of Trump, and including in Vermont, where people like independents can vote. Those are crucial people that Trump is going to need come next November. November to vote for him. So perhaps an effort we should see in the next coming weeks to really welcome in some of those Haley voters that have been kind of cast aside by Trump's rhetoric and his actions.
Nydia, you haven't just been covering the Haley campaign and the candidate, you've been covering Haley voters. And it was so interesting to me last night to see the exit polling data from CBS News that showed so many of her own supporters have real reservations about supporting Trump down the line. Where do you believe, based on your reporting, the Haley voter in South Carolina and elsewhere is going to go? Are they going to stay home, think about supporting Trump, maybe even support President Biden? Because we saw the president explicitly today reach out to Haley's voters.
Yes, and it's really interesting to see that both President Biden and former President Donald Trump are both asking for the support of Haley. And this is because essentially they can go both ways. And I've noticed from covering Haley from the early voting states, when we started in Iowa and New Hampshire, for example, we would see a lot of voters who were conservative, were registered Republicans, and who had no doubt whatsoever that they were going to be voting for the Republican nominee. If it wasn't Haley, given that they were attending her events, they were clear supporters, they were willing to vote for Donald Trump. But as we transcended into the campaign year and we followed Haley through other states, including the Super Tuesday states, this is when we began to see a variety of voters with different opinions. There was many that were expressing that they flat out would not vote for Donald Trump. They were Republicans, but they were not going to vote for him, and neither were they going to be voting for President Biden. And so what many that I came across were saying was that simply they were going to be sitting this election out. So this is what we're facing, that we're also going to be facing the problem that exactly how many voters are actually going to turn out and support either candidate when they're not necessarily favoring one or the other. But it is important to note that this changes a lot from state to state. In South Carolina, even as conservative as many Republicans could be that were supporting Haley, many of them were saying we're willing to vote for President Biden so long as the fact that we don't have to go and live a second Trump administration.
And Olivia, quickly, I think back to history, 1980, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, bitter rivals in 1980, but he ultimately put one of his rivals on the ticket as his running mate. Is there any talk among your Trump sources about, look, it's been a brutal fight against Haley, but maybe she should be in the mix for VP?
You know, never say never with Donald Trump. There's plenty of people that he went against in 2016 that he then brought into the fold later. I'm thinking Dr. Ben Carson is someone like that. So never really say never, but there's a lot of bad blood between Nikki Haley and the Make America Great Again movement. I would be having a hard time seeing some of those supporters welcoming her back in, if not for Trump himself. It's
interesting. I heard from a Trump source last night that Ben Carson might be on the VP list, someone who's going to be vetted in the coming months. We'll see what happens. Olivia Rinaldi and Nydia Cavazos, thank you so much for your reporting and excellent work in the last few days and months. Meanwhile, tomorrow, President Biden will deliver the State of the Union address. He will speak to the nation as the government is on this brink of a shutdown, though talks are continuing. And he faces a real challenge now in the general election campaign as it moves in that direction against former President Donald Trump. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now at the table. So this is a moment coming after Super Tuesday where it's not formally the general election, right, but it's informally the general election. How is the president expected to handle it?
They're going to try to use it as a kickoff to this general election season in hopes of trying to turn around those numbers, especially when it comes to concerns about the economy, his ability to serve longer, as he is already the oldest president. And try to set some expectations for what possibly could be done by Congress in the midst of this election year. We know he has spent really since December thinking about this speech, but most intensely in the last few days at Camp David with his senior advisors. Today, again, off the public grid at least, focused on the address. Because, you know, it's a captive audience of upwards of 20 million people, at least on television and then in the social space as well. They understand this is a huge opportunity for him to try to set the pace for the year.
What do you expect to hear? I mean, State of the Unions always have this grab bag of issues, but are we going to hear, based on your conversations with Biden sources and knowing things could change, January 6th, unions, labor issues, reproductive rights?
All of that in one way or another. We know now, based on some info they've shared with us this afternoon, that there's going to be a big focus on trying to tackle concerns about the cost of things or battling inflation. He's going to try to do, or at least propose, extending some things that were done in the Inflation Reduction Act regarding prescription drug prices, understanding that that's a really popular and important and urgent concern for a lot of voters, trying to get Medicare to be able to negotiate now up to 50 different drugs that deal with cancer, heart disease, and diabetes, and then also call on Congress to cap the amount of money somebody with private insurance, any American with private insurance, has at $2,000 a year. Right now, it's being done for Medicare recipients through the Inflation Reduction Act. The argument now being anyone with private insurance shouldn't have to pay more than $2,000 a year. Would require legislation from Congress. You know, they can't even agree on when to go to lunch, so it would be a tall order. But by merely presenting that in an election year, it suggests to the voter, at least they hope, I'm trying to do something to help you out.
I'd like to bring up a statement from earlier today from Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. If we could show that. He said, quote, "It should come as no surprise that as the nominee, he will have my support. During his presidency, we worked together to accomplish great things for the American people." So McConnell, someone who essentially stopped speaking to Trump after December 2020, and especially after January 6th, now supporting Trump. Speaker Mike Johnson supporting Trump. How does the Biden White House want to position the congressional Republicans as the party of Trump, if at all?
They're certainly going to continue to blame them, especially if things like funding for Ukraine don't get passed here in the coming weeks. The president's made very clear he thinks it's the MAGA wing of the Republican Party and MAGA-backed lawmakers in Congress that are holding this up.
Not to interrupt, is there any debate inside the administration about how much to lean into Ukraine? Because do they still see it as a winner, not only for them on policy in terms of their foreign policy, but politically?
Politically, maybe less so, but of course, it becomes an issue for them politically if things go sideways in Ukraine, right? Because then he's going to get blamed by not only people here, but around the world that you may have mismanaged that situation. Unless he's done a good enough job telling voters, I did everything I could, it was Republicans who held it up. Unlikely to be a major theme of the speech, but as with most of these addresses, there is a foreign policy section, and we know now he was trying to get some notable guests in the room who've all declined. Navalny's wife, the First Lady of Ukraine, both of them citing logistical and scheduling reasons for not being able to come. But that kind of an attempt was being made to put them in the room to sort of stare at lawmakers and say, how could you not deal with this issue when people like this are suffering, or these women embody the suffering of so many. So we'll see how he decides to talk about it. But look, polling shows there's a majority support for continuing to help them, growing skepticism about whether that should be open-ended, but something they're certainly going to push for. And they can push for it with the support of Mitch McConnell, who, while he has to support the president now because he says, I was going to support the Republican nominee, isn't someone who's expected to go down to Mar-a-Lago, right, and kiss the ring and pose for photos, and is someone that the president can still do work with, even as he understands he's got to go support the guy who's running to lead his party.
All right, Ed, I want you to step back for a second. Think about everything you've done reporting on President Biden. You covered him as a candidate, vice president, now covering him as president of the United States. What are you really watching tomorrow night when you're sitting there with your notebook and watching? Because I'll tell you what I'm watching. I'm watching his back and forth with the Republicans.
Yep.
Remember the most recent, I think it was the last State of the Union.
Last year.
He had the exchange with the GOP as it went, and it was kind of an impromptu moment that said Biden still has it in terms of the extemporaneous style. What are you watching?
Few things. Like many Americans who sit at home wondering, can he make it through and not have some stumble that gets used against him in advertising or in talking points by Republicans? And in what way does he maybe expand upon the themes that he likes to talk about almost every single day? This is the United States of America. We can do anything if we work together. Is there some new line that sort of speaks to where we are right now and tries to cast ahead to the election? And yeah, they would love more than anything else to be interrupted again by a Republican in the room so that he can banter with him. What happens if he's interrupted by somebody calling for a ceasefire? How does he handle that? He has not been confronted with that much in the public space in the last few weeks. They've kept him away from protesters when he's on the road. When you were with him in Michigan, remember, they didn't really release the schedule because they don't want crowds showing up. When he's on the road anywhere else, they're keeping it pretty quiet. If he's confronted with that at all in the room, how does he address it? And then let's see what other kind of policy prescriptions he's putting out there to at least suggest to voters, here's what I would do if I had a Congress that would work with me. We know a lot of it will focus on the economy, but they usually have some trick up their sleeve.
On the Israel point, it's interesting. He and Vice President Harris have spoken in recent days about the need for a ceasefire.
They have. She more forcefully than him, perhaps. And they're certainly waiting to see if Hamas ever agrees to anything. And we'll see how it's discussed in the room. Because remember, aid to Israel is also being held up by this ongoing disagreement over how exactly to spend money.
Ed O'Keefe is so right. One of the most scripted moments in American politics, but we often remember the unscripted parts of the presentation. Ed O'Keefe, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Our special coverage at CBS of the President's State of the Union address and the Republican response, that will begin tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern here on CBS News, and again at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can stream the speeches right here starting at 9 p.m. Eastern. Now, senior advisor and assistant to President Biden, Tom Perez, joins us next to discuss the priorities in tomorrow's State of the Union. You're streaming America Decides.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
If China invades Taiwan, what will the U.S. Navy do?
Here in Tel Aviv, second siren in about 10 minutes.
This Humvee just pulled up and said, it's time to leave.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Stories start with the who, what, when, and where. But it's why it's important to you that matters most. Knowing what to ask is how you open the door to a deeper understanding. See you on Prime Time, streaming free everywhere.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely.
As Taiwan faces threats and aggression.
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, they are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme.
Record-breaking storm surge and devastating wind.
Every second counts.
The mud punched a hole right through the wall.
See, hear, feel the forecast. Tonight on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
Welcome back to America Decides. Over the weekend, President Biden was working on his State of the Union address at Camp David, surrounded by key advisors. The speech, of course, always an opportunity for the president to make his case ahead of re-election to voters. Senior advisor and assistant to President Joe Biden, Tom Perez, former cabinet secretary, joins us now. He's also the director of the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here. Now working for the president in the White House. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
So, Secretary, let me play something for you. This is from the State of the Union in 2023, a key moment. Let's listen.
Some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy. I'll give you a copy of the proposal.
That was 2023. That wasn't even an election year. Now it's an election year. Is the president preparing not just to make his case to the country, but for a rough and tumble experience in a chamber dominated by congressional Republicans, including by Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who we just saw standing up and shouting at the president?
Well, I remember that moment vividly, Robert, because the president ended up negotiating in real time with those Republicans to take cuts to Medicare and Social Security off the table. It was a remarkable moment where the president was thinking on his feet and really put them in their place. And, you know, I hope that we'll have a respectful conversation tomorrow night. And the president's going to talk about, you know, where we were, where we've come, and what we need to do. And as you know, where we were in 2021, you know, the president took office 2 weeks after an insurrection. We had COVID in full swing. We had so much loss of life and, frankly, loss of hope for a lot of people. And where we've come is, you know, we now have an unemployment rate 2 years in a row under 4%. That hasn't happened in 50 years. The infrastructure bill, the American Rescue Plan, the CHIPS and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Safe Communities Act. The president has implemented an agenda that has really transformed lives, transformed communities. And I've been traveling across the country to see all these things and to talk about the investments that we're making. And they've really transformed lives, whether it's making sure people have internet, people have health care. But we've got more work to do. And the president will be talking tomorrow night about the unfinished business, democracy, the economy, health care, so many issues that we have unfinished business.
What about former President Donald Trump? Let me read to you a statement from President Biden earlier today. He was making his pitch to Nikki Haley's supporters. He said, quote, Donald Trump made it clear he doesn't want Nikki Haley's supporters. Let's show this on screen. I want to be clear. There is a place for them in my campaign. So you see the president today explicitly making his case to traditional Republicans who might have questions about former President Trump's character, his conduct, about January 6th, issues related to democracy. You talked about health care. You talked about the economy. What about January 6th democracy? Will we hear that in the State of the Union?
I mean, you know, democracy, freedom, and our economy are all on the ballot. Remember, Ronald Reagan was, you know, the evil empire, the Soviet Union. He understood the importance of NATO, and now you have a, you know, Donald Trump saying to Putin, you know, do whatever you want in NATO. You have, you know, democracy was a big part of what motivated Joe Biden to run. The aftermath of Charlottesville in Virginia, and now the insurrection as well. And so these things are very real. Freedom is on the ballot. The freedom that women and families have to make decisions about their own reproductive health. You know, IVF is a huge issue, and these issues, the differences couldn't be greater. Do you want a president who's going to engage NATO, make sure that we continue the greatest alliance in the world, or do you want a president who's going to be Putin's poodle?
Secretary
do you want a president
Perez,
who's, yes.
Let's stick with foreign policy for a moment.
Sure.
You talked about Ukraine. There's clearly a divide even within the GOP over how to handle Ukraine. What about Israel's war with Hamas? I want to show something on screen. Minnesota's Democratic primary results from Super Tuesday. There was a large chunk of Democratic voters who supported uncommitted, and we've seen in some contests some real frustrations among rank-and-file Democrats, some progressives about how the Biden administration, which you work inside, has been handling Israel and its war with Hamas. Is the president going to speak to those Democrats who have criticism of his handling of that issue in particular?
Well, the president understands that there are many people who have lost loved ones in Gaza, lost loved ones in Israel. I traveled along with another group of senior leaders from the White House to Dearborn a few weeks back. We're going to be traveling to other cities to listen and understand and get an even more granular understanding of the pain that they're obviously feeling. The president has said regularly that we are working 24/7 to forge a durable ceasefire, an opportunity to release hostages, an opportunity to expand humanitarian aid. You've seen the airdrops, and an opportunity to build what we hope will be a durable peace, where we embrace and we get all the parties to embrace a two-state solution. It won't be easy, but I respect the people in Michigan, the people in Minnesota who have, heartfelt and very real concerns. We are listening to those concerns, and we're working tirelessly to bring forth that ceasefire as soon as possible.
Secretary Tom Perez at the White House working closely with President Biden and his top advisors. We appreciate your preview of the State of the Union and for stopping by. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Next up, we analyzed last night's Super Tuesday numbers and what it all says about the 2024 race. You're streaming America Decides.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, or bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
This is CBS.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
They tell me, the pundits and otherwise, that there's never been one like this. There's never been anything so conclusive.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was former President Donald Trump last night reacting to his Super Tuesday victories. Meanwhile, recent CBS News polling finds voters aren't encouraged about the idea of a rematch between Trump and Biden. 48% say they feel negative about it, while 9% say they feel inspired. That's 9%. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now from the data desk. Anthony, we're talking with Secretary Tom Perez about the impact of foreign policy in this race. What are you seeing in your data?
Yeah, it speaks to larger themes, Bob, as Donald Trump, closes in on the nomination. About the direction of the party, we know there's a MAGA base. We know that a lot of folks agree with him. Let's point out to one data point I find that's really interesting in telling the way the party has moved in his direction. Check this out. Views among Republicans of Russia. And we've seen this increase in the number who say that Russia is an ally or friendly, we've seen this decrease just over the last year in the number who say that Russia is an enemy. And it's still not a majority, but it's a directional shift. You look at things like that and you think, okay, this is another example of the party kind of being remade in Trump's direction, in Trump's image, as we see across a lot of things. And so that's a debate. And that debate, of course, echoes into, Ukraine, aid, and other foreign policy aspects as well. So I just wanted to, I'm glad you picked up on that and asked, Bob.
Anthony, very briefly here in just a few seconds, could Trump win over Haley voters or not?
Yes, many of them will tell you that they will ultimately come home in a matchup against Joe Biden. But I think it remains an open question because so many Haley voters were there voting against Trump as the nominee, not necessarily just for Haley. And we're going to watch whether the Biden campaign, as he's already starting to talk about, can try and pull over just some of them, because a small difference can have a big effect in a close race, Bob.
And President Biden just issued that statement today saying Haley voters come on over to his side. Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much. That does it for us today here at America Decides. You're streaming CBS News.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes